high-end set of speakers can set you back tens of thousands of dollars. Headphones could be considered as better value because a premium set of headphones is just $2,000 to $4,000. But then there's IEMs, or in-ear monitors, earphones. You can spend $6,000 or more on IEMs, but FiiO would tell you that's not necessary. And I think I tend to agree. The new FiiO Flagship IEMs are $950. That's not cheap for an IEM, but when you see and hear what you get for that money, you'll probably be as impressed as I was. FiiO sent me the FX17s for review, but as always, have no influence about what I'm going to say. And if you're anything like me, you'll probably prioritize comfort and sound quality above all else when it comes to IEMs. But there are some other important factors we should talk about with the FX17s. Firstly, they come with an incredible range of accessories. Of course, there's a nice cable, specifically one that's made with silver, copper and gold wires on the inside, and that's terminated with MMCX connectors at the earphone end, and a swappable plug at the amplifier end. As you'd expect, the plug options for the amplifier end include the 4.4mm that I've got fitted and a 3.5mm as well, so balanced and single-ended. What you might not expect to be bundled with an earphone like this at this sort of price is the USB-C connection you see there. This tiny plug is a DAC and headphone amp built into the cable. That means you can plug the FX17s with that USB-C connection directly into a computer, tablet or smartphone, and that's all you need for great quality sound. However, when I say it delivers great quality sound, that does require a little bit of clarification. The USB-C connection in the FX17's wire isn't about to replace a high-end dedicated audio device. In other words, it doesn't sound as good as plugging the normal FX17 wire, say with the 4.4mm plug, into the FiiO's own M23 digital audio player or the Chord Mojo 2. The USB-C connection is a bit crisper and a little bit drier than either of those devices. As a result, it's a little bit less refined and not quite as easy to enjoy. And for some people, that might lead to a slightly fatiguing experience with the FX17 using the USB-C connection. It's not to say it's bad, it just might be a little bit more fatiguing for some people. But for convenience and a super lightweight portable solution, having the USB-C connection there is an absolute game changer. I'd say it's still going to deliver maybe 80 to 85% of what the FX17s are capable of, and that's brilliant if all you need to carry with you is a pair of IEMs and whatever other devices you normally carry, laptop, smartphone, tablet, etc. And yes, we will get to exactly what the FX17 sounds like in a moment, but we've got a couple of other things to cover off before we get there. One of those things is the immense range of tips provided with the FX17. When you slide out the drawers in the box that the FX17s arrive in, you'll find a case full of tips, lots and lots of them. It's an impressive selection. That is, until you lift out that case to look at it and realize that there's a whole nother case underneath. Now, it's beyond an impressive selection. If you can't find a good tip from this range, and yes, all of these were included in the box with the FX17, if you can't find a good, comfortable match with your ears using all of these options, you probably need to go down the path of custom molded IEMs. More likely though, is that after a little bit of trial and error with those tips, you're going to find a perfect fit between your ears and the beautiful all titanium shells of the FX17s. Once that's done, you can enjoy what's going on inside those titanium shells. These IEMs are chunky for good reason. Inside each of these shells is a dynamic driver for bass, 4 balanced armature drivers for the mid-range, and 8 electrostatic drivers taking care of the treble. Technically, those drivers are split into 5 different frequency bands, not just bass, mid, and treble in other words, but that's an approximate division of how the responsibilities are handled between each of the driver types. And thankfully, despite the size and moderate weight of each of these IEMs, they're very comfortable once they're in the ear. What that means is that you can just focus on the music coming out of these, and that music sounds fantastic. The first detail to strike me about the FX17's presentation was the wonderful sense of separation of sounds. There's an incredible sense of focus on each individual sound within the soundstage, and the articulation of sounds like a guitar being plucked is absolutely magnificent. The overall tonality of the FX17 doesn't sound completely natural to me, but it's very subtly coloured and it's an extremely enjoyable interpretation. Keep in mind too that there's no way of defining what is truly correct, and we all hear quite differently because of the shapes and lengths of our ear canals. So whilst they don't sound perfectly natural to me, they do sound wonderfully enjoyable, and they might sound perfectly natural to you. Either way, I think they're going to sound extremely enjoyable regardless. And what prevents me from calling them completely natural is that I find them to have just a little bit of extra treble emphasis. Thanks to the use of all those electrostatic drivers in the treble range, the treble is always wonderfully refined and smooth, but it's just a little bit elevated to my ears. The flip side of that though is that the FX17s reveal all kinds of teeny tiny details and textures in the music that can be quite addictive. To me, it's a welcome trade-off. At the other end of the spectrum, the bass from the FX17s is lifted just a little bit, but once again it's very tastefully done, so it doesn't make them a bass forward IEM so much as giving them some presence and body down low. This is the nicest bass I've heard from a FiiO IEM in all the ones I've ever tried. Likewise, if we come back to the mid-range, it's got a good sense of weight and body, it's well balanced in the mix, and it's got a lovely sense of timbre too. As you'd probably expect from everything I've said so far, when we start thinking about the technicalities like soundstage, that's also fantastic. Very good width, a nice sense of depth for an IEM, and a great sense of space around all the sounds. As with almost all IEMs, the FX17s aren't going to throw a soundstage that's outside your head, but I would say they're better than most other IEMs I've tried. They're up there in probably my top 5 IEMs in terms of soundstaging. But that also leads us to some comparisons for a bit of extra context. Comparing the $950 multi-driver FX17 to the $1,300 IE900 from Sennheiser, which uses just a single dynamic driver, that was an interesting comparison. The strength of single driver designs is always coherency. They can deliver a sound that all fits together perfectly because it's all coming from the one driver. Every frequency is delivered with the exact same timing and timbre. Whereas multi-driver designs often have slightly different timbres between different frequencies depending on which drivers are delivering those frequencies. That is true here as well. The IE900 is stronger in its timbre on the vocal delivery, and I'd say the imaging is a little bit tighter from the IE900. But I'd also say that the differences are tiny. The FX17 is incredibly coherent for a design using 3 different driver types and 5 different crossover points. In other words, there are 5 divisions of the audio split across those 3 different types of drivers. When comparing these two, you do notice that bit of treble emphasis in the FX17s, and it's most noticeable on sounds like the brushed snare drum in treble. That emphasis is noticeable, particularly in the lower end of the treble, but it's done so tastefully that I never found it distracting. If you're just listening for enjoyment and not technically focused on comparisons and critical listening, it's not like these things are going to jump out at you. It's something I'm noticing because I'm critically listening to give you some descriptions. And the more time I spent with these two IEMs, the more I realized that I couldn't really split them. Sure, they sound different, but I couldn't tell you which one sounds better. The IE900 throws a slightly wider soundstage, I think, but the FX17 might produce the more naturally shaped soundstage because it's got a little bit more depth to the stage, even though it's a little bit narrower. That makes for a slightly more spherical soundstage rather than one that's a bit more of a narrow band. Of course, some will prefer the sound of the IE900s, others will prefer the sound of the FX17s. The key point for me in this comparison, though, was that I think you can now match the technical performance of the IE900 for $350 less. At the same time, you're getting more tips with the FX17, you're getting that wonderful USB-C inline connection, and arguably a better cable. But before I crowned the FX17 as the best IEM under $1,000, there was another comparison I had to reach for. And again, it happened to be with a Sennheiser IEM, this time the IE600. At $699, the IE600 is now significantly cheaper than the FX17, but I know that some people consider the IE600 to be better than the IE900. And straight away, the IE600s have a very different presentation from the FX17s. They produce a soundstage that's narrower than the FX17s, but deeper again. They also have a warmer overall sound than the FX17s or the IE900s. However, where there is a little bit of treble emphasis in the IE600s, some little sort of spikes or peaks in the treble, they get a bit harsher than the FX17. And so for people seeking a richer, warmer tuning, I do think the IE600 is possibly the better choice. The FX17s are not what I would call a warm or rich sounding IEM. However, in every other way I can think of, whether it's separation of sounds, whether it's tonal and timbral qualities, refinement and smoothness of all sounds at all frequencies, I think the FX17s are better. They deliver excellent bass and treble extension, great presence in every frequency, and in each case I think they do it better with more control and more refinement than the wonderful IE600s. The FX17s ultimately are a wonderfully built, extremely well accessorized and beautiful IEM that's also very comfortable, and I think they could easily have cost $1,500 if FiiO had chosen to go that way. Thankfully, they didn't choose to go that way, and that makes the FX17 one of the very best IEMs on the market, in my opinion, for under $1,000. Of course, if you want a pair of them, I'll put some links in the description down below where you can go and pick them up for yourself. And in the meantime, if you're wondering what I was going on about with the shapes and lengths of our ear canals changing the sound, I've pinned a video here at the end that's going to tell you everything you need to know to better understand IEMs and reviews of IEMs like this one and those from other reviewers. So watch that one next, it's pinned here at the end. But for now, a thank you to YouTube channel members, also to channel Patreon members, and to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.